The nesting grounds of the Crimson Wyrm Clan sat deep inside the Ash Peak Mountains, far from human roads and human eyes. The rocks there were warm from the heat below the earth, and the air smelled of smoke and old stone. It was a place where the clan had lived for hundreds of years, and it was a place where their young had always been safe. Until the morning ember was gone. It was an elder named Vorith who noticed first. She had come to check on the hatchlings at dawn, as she did every single morning without fail. She counted them one by one, moving slowly between the nesting stones, her great red eyes scanning each small sleeping shape. And then she stopped. She counted again. Her eyes moved across every corner of the grounds, every shadow, every warm hollow between the rocks. Ember was not there. Vorith stood very still for a long moment. The other hatchlings slept on, small and curled and unaware. The morning air was quiet. But inside Vorith's chest, something cold and sharp began to grow. She had led the Crimson Wyrm Clan for 40 years. She had seen battles and storms and long hard winters. She was not a creature that panicked easily. But this was different. This was one of their young. This was Ember. She let out a single low sound, deep and rolling, like thunder before a storm. It moved through the mountain like a wave. Within minutes, the clan was awake. Warriors landed around her one after another, their great wings folding as their claws hit stone. They were large and red-scaled, with eyes like burning coals and tails that swept the ground behind them. They looked at Vorith and waited. She did not waste time with long words. She told them Ember was gone. She told them the hatchling could not have wandered far on its own, not at that age, not with those small wings that could barely carry it off the ground. Something had happened. Someone had taken it. And there was only one kind of creature that came near dragon nesting grounds for reasons that were never good. Humans. The word moved through the clan like a flame through dry grass. Some of the warriors growled low in their throats. Others spread their wings without even being told. They all knew the village. It sat at the base of the mountains, no more than half a day's flight away, a small, quiet collection of farms and wooden buildings and thin roads. The clan had never bothered it. They had left it alone, as long as the humans left them alone. But now one of their young was missing. And patience had its limits. Vorith looked at her warriors one more time. Her voice was calm but hard, the way stone is calm and hard. She said they would go to the village. She said they would find Ember. And she said that if any harm had come to the hatchling, the village would not see another sunrise. Nobody argued. Nobody asked questions. They rose into the sky together, a long dark shape against the pale morning, moving toward the valley below. Down in the valley, the village of Millhaven was already awake and going about its morning work. Smoke rose from chimneys. A dog barked somewhere near the market road. Children carried water from the well. It was an ordinary morning, quiet and simple, the way most mornings in Millhaven were. Near the far edge of the village, past the last fence and the old apple tree that had stood there longer than anyone could remember, there was a small farm. It belonged to a man named Grant. Grant was not a large man or a loud one. He was somewhere in his middle years, with rough hands from years of farm work and a calm face that rarely showed much surprise at anything. He had lived on that farm his whole life, working the land the same way his father had, and his father before that. He did not look for trouble. He did not go looking for adventure. But 4 days ago, trouble had found him anyway. He had been walking through the edge of the forest just before dark, checking an old fence line that ran along the trees, when he heard it. A sound so small he almost missed it. A soft, broken cry, not like any animal he knew, but weak and low and desperate, the sound of something that had been hurting for a long time and was running out of strength to keep making noise. Grant had followed the sound. He found Ember in a narrow ditch between two old tree roots, half hidden under a fall of dead leaves. The hatchling was tiny, no bigger than a large dog, with dull red scales that should have been bright but were dusty and pale from hunger and cold. One of its front legs was caught in the rusted wire of an old trap that someone had left in the forest and forgotten years ago. The wire had cut into the skin above its small clawed foot, and the wound was not fresh. Grant had looked at it for a moment. Then he had knelt down in the dirt and begun working at the wire with his bare hands. It took a long time. The hatchling made small frightened sounds and tried to pull away at first, but it was too weak to fight much. Grant kept his movements slow and his voice low, talking to it the whole time the way he talked to his animals when they were scared, steady, quiet, without any big sudden movements. By the time he got the wire loose, the hatchling had stopped struggling and was simply watching him with large, exhausted eyes. Grant had wrapped the small leg in a strip of clean cloth from his shirt. Then he had carried Ember back to the farm under his coat to keep it warm, because the night air was cold and the little creature was shaking. That had been 4 days ago. Now Ember slept in the barn on a thick bed of hay that Grant had piled up against the back wall, close enough to the old heating stone to stay warm through the night. Its leg was better, not perfect, but healing clean. It ate well. It slept long and deep, the way a creature sleeps when it finally feels safe. Grant stood in the barn doorway that morning with a bucket of feed in one hand, watching the hatchling sleep. He had thought about what to do many times over the last 4 days. He knew what Ember was. He was not a foolish man. He knew that somewhere out there, a clan of very large, very dangerous dragons was missing one of their young. He also knew he was not going to put a hurt creature back out in the cold before it was ready. So he stayed. And he waited. And he hoped, quietly, that he would have a little more time. He would not get it. The first night was the hardest. Grant had laid Ember down in the hay and covered it with an old blanket, and then he had sat beside it on an upturned bucket for a long time, just watching. The hatchling had not slept at first. It had lain there with its eyes half open, watching him back, its small sides rising and falling too fast, the way an animal breathes when it is frightened and trying not to show it. Grant had not tried to touch it again that night. He had simply sat there, close but still, and let the hatchling look at him as long as it needed to. He talked a little. Not about anything important. He talked about the farm, about the weather, about the old apple tree outside that dropped more fruit than he could ever use. His voice was low and even, the kind of voice that did not carry any sharp edges. He was not even sure why he talked. The hatchling could not understand him. But somehow it felt like the right thing to do, and Grant had always trusted that feeling more than he trusted clever thinking. Somewhere past midnight, Ember's breathing slowed. The small eyes closed. The tense little body went soft in the hay. Grant sat for a while longer to make sure. Then he got up quietly, pulled the blanket up a little higher, and went inside to sleep. The next morning he brought food. He was not sure what a dragon hatchling ate, but he made a reasonable guess. He brought raw meat from the cold store, the kind he kept for the dogs, and set it down near the hay without getting too close. Then he stepped back and waited. Ember looked at the meat. Then it looked at Grant. Then it looked at the meat again. It ate. Slowly at first, and then all at once, the way a hungry creature eats when it finally decides it is safe enough to stop being careful. Grant watched and felt something settle quietly in his chest. He brought more. The hatchling ate that too. After that, the days had a shape to them. Grant would come into the barn in the morning with food and fresh water, and Ember would be awake and waiting. At first the hatchling stayed in its corner and watched him do his work from a distance. Then, after a few days, it started moving closer. Just a little at first, a few steps across the hay, then stopping, watching his face to see if anything changed. Grant never made any sudden moves. He never raised his voice. He just went about his work and let Ember come to him in its own time. By the third morning, the hatchling was following him around the barn. It walked behind him at a short distance, its small claws clicking softly on the stone floor, its head low and curious. When Grant stopped, it stopped. When he moved, it moved. It reminded him of a young pup learning the shape of its home and the person it had decided to trust. He smiled at that thought, though he did not say it out loud. The leg was healing well. He changed the cloth wrapping every morning, and each time Ember held still for it now without pulling away. The first time Grant had reached for the bandage, the hatchling had made a sharp little sound and pulled back hard. Grant had stopped immediately, waited, then tried again more slowly. That had gone on for a while until Ember understood that the touching was not meant to hurt. After that it let him work without any fuss, and sometimes it even pressed its small leg gently toward him, as if offering it up. It was on the fourth day that Ada came by. Ada lived on the next farm over, close enough that the smoke from her chimney was visible on cold mornings. She was a sharp and practical woman, older than Grant by several years, with gray hair she kept pinned back and eyes that did not miss much. She had been a good neighbor for a long time and she had always been honest with him, sometimes more honest than he would have liked. She came through the back gate the way she always did, carrying a small jar of something she had made, and she nearly walked straight into Grant coming out of the barn with an empty bucket. She looked at him. Then she looked past him at the barn door, which he had not quite pulled shut behind him. She stepped around him and pushed the door open the rest of the way. Ember was sitting in the hay looking back at her with calm, curious eyes. Ada stood very still for a moment. Then she turned to Grant with a look on her face that was not quite anger and not quite fear but was something very close to both. She asked him how long. He told her 4 days. She let out a long breath through her nose and walked away from the barn door and set her jar down on the fence post and crossed her arms. Then she told him, in a very level voice, that he had lost his mind. Grant did not argue with that. She told him he knew what that creature was. She told him that somewhere out there, a clan of dragons, the Crimson Wyrm Clan, she said, and her voice dropped a little when she said the name, was going to notice that their young was gone. And when they did, they were not going to send a polite message. They were going to come here. They were going to come to this village, to this farm, to this barn. And they were not going to be calm about it. Grant listened to all of this. He nodded slowly. Then he told her that the hatchling had been caught in a trap with a bad wound, alone in the cold, too weak to make it through another night on its own. He told her it was better now but not ready to be on its own yet. And he told her that he was not going to push a small hurt creature back out into the forest before it was strong enough to go. Ada looked at him for a long time. She looked back at the barn. Ember had moved to the doorway and was sitting there watching both of them with its large quiet eyes. Ada picked up her jar from the fence post. She pushed it into Grant's hands and told him it was preserved meat, the good kind, and that the creature would probably like it. Then she pointed one finger at him and told him he was a stubborn fool and that when the dragons came she was going to stand on her porch and watch from a safe distance. Grant thanked her for the jar. She made a short sound that was not quite a laugh and walked back through the gate. Grant looked down at the jar, then back at Ember, who had padded out into the morning light and was now sitting near his boots, looking up at him with a perfectly calm expression, as if none of this was very complicated at all. He opened the jar. The hatchling ate every last piece. Grant was in the barn when the sky changed. He did not hear them at first. He was cleaning out the water trough in the corner, working quietly the way he did most mornings, while Ember sat nearby chewing on a piece of dried meat from Ada's jar. It was an ordinary morning. The light through the barn door was pale and soft, and the air smelled of hay and earth. Then the birds stopped singing. Grant straightened up slowly. He had lived on that farm his whole life and he knew the sounds of it the way he knew his own breathing. The birds outside never just stopped. Not all at once like that. Not without a reason. He walked to the barn door and looked out. The sky to the north was dark. Not the dark of clouds or rain, it was a moving dark, a shifting shape that spread wide and came fast and low over the tops of the mountains. He stood very still and watched it for a moment. Then the shape broke apart into individual forms, and he understood what he was seeing. Dragons. Many of them. Coming fast. He turned back to the barn. Ember had gone very still in the hay, its nose lifted, its small body tight and alert. It could sense them too. Its eyes had gone wide and something in its posture had changed, not fear exactly, but a deep and instinctive awareness, the way a young creature responds to something it recognizes in its blood before its mind catches up. Grant looked at the hatchling for a moment. Then he looked back at the sky. He set down his cloth, straightened his coat, and walked out of the barn. The village had already seen them. The alarm bell at the top of the market road was ringing hard, and people were running in every direction. Mothers pulled children by the arm. Men dropped their tools and ran. Doors slammed. Shutters closed. The dogs were barking wildly and the horses in the paddock near the road had broken into a full panic, pulling at their ropes and throwing their heads back. The Crimson Wyrm warriors came in low over the fields at the edge of the village. They did not land. They swept down close to the ground and breathed fire along the outer edges, not into the buildings, not yet, but close enough that the dry grass at the field borders caught and burned in long orange lines. It was a warning. A very clear and very loud one. The heat of it pushed across the village like a wave and the smell of smoke came sharp and fast on the morning air. People screamed. More ran. The bell kept ringing. And then the largest of them landed. Vorith came down at the entrance to the village road with a force that shook the ground. Her wings spread wide on either side of her as she landed, each one blocking out a great piece of the sky, and then they folded slowly against her back. She was enormous. Her scales were deep red, darker than the others, the color of old dried blood. Her eyes were bright and burning and they swept across the empty road ahead of her with a cold and deliberate patience. She did not roar immediately. She stood there first and let the silence do its work. Then she spoke. Her voice was not the kind of voice that needed to be loud to carry. It was low and heavy and it moved through the air and through the walls of every building in the village like it was made of stone. She said she knew a human had taken one of their young. She said she knew the hatchling was somewhere in this village. She said they had one chance, bring the young one forward now, alive and unharmed, and she would take her clan and leave. But if the hatchling had been hurt, or if no one came forward, she would not leave a single roof standing by the time the sun reached the middle of the sky. The village road was completely empty. No one came out. No one answered. Every door stayed shut and every window stayed dark. Vorith waited. Her tail moved slowly behind her. Two of her warriors landed on either side of the road further back, their wings still half spread, their eyes moving over the buildings. The burning grass at the field edge crackled and hissed. The silence stretched out long and thin. And then a barn door at the far end of the village opened, and a single man walked out. Grant came up the road at an even pace. He was not running. He was not hurrying. He walked the way he always walked, steady and unhurried, like a man going to check on his fence line. He had not brought anything with him. No weapon, no tool, nothing in his hands at all. His coat was plain and his boots were muddy from the morning work and he looked, in every possible way, like exactly what he was, a simple farmer with work-roughened hands and a calm face. He stopped about 20 feet from Vorith and looked up at her. She was much larger up close. Her head alone was bigger than his entire barn door. The heat coming off her body was dry and steady, like standing near a forge. Her eyes fixed on him immediately and did not move, and the weight of that gaze was something Grant felt in his chest like a hand pressing flat against it. He held her gaze anyway. He told her, in a clear and level voice, that her hatchling was in his barn. He told her it was safe. He told her it had been caught in an old trap in the forest 4 days ago with a bad wound on its leg, and that he had found it and brought it home and cared for it. He told her it had eaten well and slept well and that the wound was healing clean. He told her he meant no harm to it. He never had. Vorith stared down at him. The burning eyes did not blink. The great head lowered, very slowly, until it was closer to his level, and the heat of her breath moved across him like a dry wind. She was looking at him the way something very old and very dangerous looks at something small that has surprised it, not with anger yet, but with a hard and careful attention. The warriors behind her had gone still. The whole village had gone still. Even the burning grass at the field edge seemed to quiet. Vorith spoke again. Her voice was lower now, and slower, and each word landed separately and heavy. She asked him if he understood what would happen to him if he was lying. Grant looked up at her and did not look away. He said he understood. And he said he was not lying. Another silence. Long and heavy and full of something that had not yet been decided. Then Vorith pulled herself up to her full height, looked past him toward the barn at the end of the road, and began to walk. Vorith moved down the village road like a storm that had not yet decided where to break. Her claws hit the ground in slow and heavy steps, each one leaving a mark in the dry earth. Her tail moved behind her, low and steady. Her eyes were fixed on the barn at the far end of the road and they did not move from it. The two warriors who had landed near the road fell into step behind her without being told, their wings folded tight, their own eyes scanning the buildings on either side. Grant walked beside her. Not behind her, not in front, beside her. He did not run to keep up with her long stride and he did not fall back. He simply walked at his own pace and let her set the direction, and if Vorith noticed this she gave no sign of it. She was not thinking about Grant at that moment. She was thinking about what she was going to find behind that barn door. She had seen things in her 40 years of leading the clan. She had seen battles and she had seen loss and she had seen what happened to young creatures when they were taken by those who meant them harm. She had prepared herself, in the way that experienced and hard creatures prepare themselves, for something bad. She had built a wall inside herself on the walk down that road, brick by brick, so that whatever she found would not break her in front of her warriors. She was going to need that wall. She was sure of it. She reached the barn door ahead of Grant by several steps. It was a plain wooden door, old and a little warped at the bottom, with a simple iron latch. Vorith looked at it for just a moment. Then she pushed it open. She did not push it gently. The door swung hard on its hinges and hit the inside wall with a sharp crack that sent the barn's small sound scattering into silence. Vorith stepped inside, her great head lowering to fit under the beam of the doorframe, her eyes sweeping the space fast and sharp the way a warrior's eyes always move when entering somewhere unknown. She saw the hay. She saw the water trough. She saw the old tools hanging on the far wall and the low shelf with its jars and cloths and the small folded blanket at the edge of the nesting area. And then she saw Ember. Every word she had prepared died. Not slowly. All at once, like a flame someone had simply covered with a hand. Gone. Ember was curled in the far corner of the barn in a deep nest of hay that had been piled up carefully against the warm back wall. The hatchling was small and red and its scales caught the thin morning light coming through the side window and gave them back as a soft, dull glow. Its injured leg was stretched out slightly from its body and wrapped in a clean strip of pale cloth that had been tied with a neat and careful knot. Its head was resting on its own folded foreleg. Its eyes were closed. Its chest rose. Fell. Rose again. Slowly. Deeply. The breathing of a creature in a sleep so complete and so untroubled that the world outside simply did not exist for it. Vorith stood completely still. Behind her, the two warriors had ducked inside the doorway and stopped. She heard one of them make a very small sound, not a word, just a sound, and then silence again. She stared at the hatchling. She stared at the wrapped leg. She stared at the thick bed of hay that someone had clearly taken time to build up against the wall, high enough to hold warmth, soft enough to cushion small bones. She looked at the bowl of clean water set nearby, at the small scraps of food beside it, at the folded blanket at the edge of the hay that still held the pressed shape of where it had recently been laid. Every one of these things she saw. And every one of them landed inside her chest like something heavy being set down very carefully on a surface that had been braced for an impact that never came. Then Ember stirred. It was the sound of the door, or perhaps the shift in the air, or perhaps just the deep instinct of a young creature sensing a change nearby. The hatchling's nose twitched first. Then one small ear moved. Then the eyes opened. Slowly, halfway, the heavy and unfocused eyes of something waking from a deep and comfortable sleep. Vorith leaned forward almost without meaning to. Her breath had gone very quiet. Ember blinked. The small head lifted from the folded foreleg and turned, and for 1/2 second it faced toward Vorith and the warriors in the doorway. But it did not stop there. The small sleepy eyes moved past Vorith. Past the warriors. Past the doorframe and out to the road beyond. They found Grant. Grant had stopped just outside the barn door, giving Vorith her space, standing quietly with his hands at his sides. He was looking in at Ember with the same calm and steady expression he wore for most things, but his eyes were soft in a way that was hard to miss if you were paying attention. Ember looked at him. Just looked at him. And something in the small body that had tensed slightly at the sudden sounds went completely loose again. The hatchling's head lowered back down onto its foreleg. The eyes closed. The small chest rose and fell once, long and slow. And Ember went back to sleep. Vorith straightened up. She stood at her full height inside the barn and she was quiet for a very long time. The warriors behind her did not speak. The barn was still. Outside, the rest of the clan waited in the sky and on the road, and the village was silent, and the whole morning seemed to be holding itself in place and waiting for something to happen. Nothing happened. Vorith looked at the sleeping hatchling for a long moment more. She looked at the wrapped leg. She looked at the hay and the water bowl and the careful small knot in the cloth bandage. She looked at all of it one more time, slowly, the way you look at something when you are making sure you are seeing it correctly and not just seeing what you expected. Then she turned around. Grant was still standing just outside the door. He had not moved. He met her eyes when she turned and he did not look away, but he also did not speak. He simply waited. Vorith looked at him. Really looked at him. Not the way she had looked at him on the road, with the burning focus of a warrior deciding whether something was a threat. She looked at him the way you look at something that has genuinely surprised you, and that does not happen to you very often, and that you are not entirely sure what to do with. A long silence passed between them. Then one of the warriors behind her said her name, very quietly, almost a question. Vorith did not answer him. She stepped out of the barn into the morning light and stood in front of Grant and looked down at him from her full height. She had come here with fire. She had come here with fury and certainty and a wall built carefully inside her chest. The wall was still there. But there was nothing behind it anymore that needed containing. Vorith looked at Grant for a long time before she spoke. The morning light was full now, coming in pale and clear over the rooftops of the village, and it caught the deep red of her scales and made them glow like cooling embers. She was enormous standing there in front of him, close enough that the dry heat of her body reached him like a warm wall, close enough that each slow breath she drew in moved the air around him. Any other person would have stepped back. Any other person would have found somewhere else to look. Grant stood where he was and looked up at her and waited. When she finally spoke, her voice was different from what it had been on the road. On the road it had been the voice of a clan matriarch delivering a warning, hard and heavy and built to carry across distance. This was quieter. Lower. It was the voice of something very old asking a question it genuinely did not know the answer to. She asked him why. Just that one word at first. Then she asked it more fully. She asked him why a human would take in one of their young, knowing what it was. Knowing what clan it belonged to. Knowing that when the clan came, and the clan would always come, there would be fire and fury and no questions asked before the burning started. She asked him why any creature with a working mind would choose that risk for the sake of a small dragon that had nothing to do with him and owed him nothing. She was not asking it the way someone asks a question they already know the answer to and want to catch you in. She was asking it the way someone asks when they are standing in front of something they did not expect and cannot yet explain and genuinely want to understand. Grant was quiet for a moment. Not because he was afraid, and not because he was searching for the right words to impress her. He was quiet because the answer was simple and he wanted to say it simply and mean it fully. Then he told her. He said he had been walking through the forest and he had heard a sound. A small, broken sound, the kind that something makes when it has been hurting for a long time and is running low on the strength to keep going. He said he followed that sound and he found Ember in a ditch with a wire around its leg and no way to get free on its own. He said it was cold that night and getting colder. He said he could not walk away from that. He said it had nothing to do with what Ember was or what clan it belonged to or what the consequences might be. He said a small creature was hurt and alone and he was standing right there, and walking away was simply not something he was able to make himself do. He looked up at her and said that was all there was to it. No other reason. That was the whole of it. Vorith did not respond immediately. She looked at him and the great burning eyes were very still and very steady and something moved behind them that was not anger and was not suspicion. It was something slower and deeper than either of those things. Behind her, the warriors waited. On the road and in the fields beyond the village and in the sky above it, the rest of the Crimson Wyrm clan was still and silent, watching. The burning grass at the field edge had died down to thin gray smoke. The village itself was still shut and quiet, every door closed, every window dark, the whole settlement holding its breath. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Vorith turned her head and looked back through the open barn door at Ember, who was still sleeping in the hay, small and peaceful and completely unaware of the stillness that had settled over everything around it. She looked at the wrapped leg. She looked at the water bowl and the hay piled high and soft against the warm wall. Then she turned back to Grant. She pulled herself up slowly to her full height. Her wings shifted against her back. She looked out over the road toward her warriors, and when she spoke this time her voice was back to the voice of the clan matriarch, but it was not the same as it had been on the road. The fury was gone from it. What was left was something older and more serious and far more permanent than fury. She spoke clearly and she spoke loudly enough that every member of the Crimson Wyrm clan within range of her voice could hear every word without question. She said that the human named Grant of this village had found their young injured and alone and had given it shelter and warmth and care and had asked for nothing in return. She said he had stood on this road alone and unarmed in front of the full fury of the Crimson Wyrm clan and had not run and had not begged and had told the truth simply and without decoration. She said that this was not the act of an enemy. She said that from this day Grant was a blood friend of the Crimson Wyrm clan. She said the words the old way, clearly and without rushing, the formal words that the clan had used for generations to mark a bond that could not be broken by time or distance or the decisions of any future leader. Never to be touched by any member of the clan. Never to be threatened. Always to be defended. In any land. In any season. Without condition and without end. The warriors heard it. Every one of them. And not one of them made a sound of disagreement. A movement came from inside the barn. Small and quiet, the soft click of little claws on stone, unhurried and calm. Ember had woken. Not with a start, not with alarm, just the slow and easy waking of a creature that had slept well and was ready to greet the morning. The hatchling stood up in the hay, stretched its small legs one at a time, and then walked toward the open barn door with its head low and its eyes still soft from sleep. It came out into the morning light and stopped beside Grant. It looked up at him. Then it pressed its head against his hand. Not a bump or a nudge. A press. Slow and deliberate and warm, the full weight of the small head leaning into his palm the way a creature leans into the touch of someone it has decided, completely and without reservation, to trust. Grant looked down at it. His hand turned slowly and rested on the top of the small warm head. He did not say anything. He did not need to. Vorith watched this. Then she lowered her head. It was a slow and deliberate movement, the great head coming down in a long steady bow, and it was followed by the two warriors nearest to her, and then the ones behind them, and then the ones on the road, and then one by one the sound of it moved outward like a wave through the whole clan, the soft sound of enormous bodies shifting, of wings folding tighter, of heads lowering across the field and the road and the sky. Not in surrender. Not in shame. In respect. For a single quiet farmer standing in the morning light with a dragon hatchling leaning against his hand, who had done nothing more and nothing less than refuse to walk past something small and hurt and alone in the cold. It was, in the end, such a simple thing. And it was, in the end, enough.